In 1720, Charleston stood as the principal port of the province of South Carolina, positioned along a natural harbor formed by the meeting of the Ashley and Cooper rivers. Its geography defined its future. The Lowcountry's tidal creeks and marshlands created both opportunity and risk. Elevated ground along the peninsula supported the town itself, while the surrounding wetlands proved well suited to rice cultivation. By the early 18th century, rice had become the colony's dominant export, shipped in increasing volume across the Atlantic. Indigo would follow later in the century, but in the 1720s rice already tied Charleston's prosperity to global markets. The city's streets reflected its role as a commercial hub. Warehouses lined the waterfront. Merchants negotiated shipments bound for Britain and the Caribbean. Enslaved Africans, forced into labor on inland plantations, formed the majority of the colony's population. Their agricultural knowledge, particularly of tidal rice cultivation, shaped the economic system that sustained Charleston's growth. This plantation economy created immense wealth for a small white elite while entrenching a rigid racial hierarchy that defined social order. Politically, the colony had recently transitioned from proprietary control to royal governance in 1719. By 1720, royal authority brought closer alignment with British imperial policy. A governor appointed by the crown presided over local affairs, supported by an elected Commons House of Assembly. While imperial officials sought stability, local planters guarded their autonomy. The balance between royal oversight and colonial self-direction remained delicate throughout these decades. Security concerns were constant. Spanish Florida lay to the south, and French Louisiana to the west. Coastal fortifications and a growing militia reflected fears of foreign attack and internal unrest. The Stono Rebellion of 1739 would later expose the colony's vulnerability, but even in the 1720s lawmakers enacted strict slave codes to maintain control. These laws regulated movement, assembly, and labor, reinforcing the plantation system's foundations. Religious life added another dimension to Charleston's character. The Church of England held official status, yet dissenting Protestant groups and a small but established Jewish community contributed to a diverse urban society. This mixture of commerce, enforced labor, imperial administration, and guarded pluralism defined Charleston in the early 1720s. The city's prosperity rested on Atlantic trade and plantation agriculture, while its political structures tied it firmly to Britain. Over time, these same structures would shape both its resilience and its internal tensions as the century advanced. By the 1740s, Charleston had matured into the wealthiest and most influential city in the southern mainland colonies. Its harbor remained the center of activity, where ships from London, Bristol, and the West Indies crowded the wharves. Rice exports continued to expand, and indigo cultivation gained momentum after mid-century, supported by British bounties that encouraged diversification. The Lowcountry plantation system deepened its hold on the region's economy. Wealth accumulated in the hands of planters who maintained townhouses in Charleston while overseeing vast rural estates worked by enslaved Africans along tidal rivers stretching inland. The social order hardened during these decades. The memory of the Stono Rebellion in 1739 lingered heavily in public life. In response, lawmakers strengthened slave codes in 1740, tightening surveillance and restricting education, movement, and assembly among the enslaved population. These measures reinforced white control while further institutionalizing racial hierarchy. Enslaved labor remained the essential force behind agricultural production, maritime loading, and much of the city's skilled craftsmanship. Charleston's geographic position continued to shape its strategic importance. During the War of Jenkins Ear and later the broader conflict known as King George's War in the 1740s, Spanish and French threats in the Atlantic world heightened anxiety. Fortifications were improved, and militia units drilled regularly. The harbor's defenses and the city's artillery underscored its value within Britain's imperial system. At the same time, transatlantic trade networks expanded, linking Charleston merchants to credit systems in London that financed plantation growth. Urban development accelerated. Brick buildings replaced earlier wooden structures in many sections of town, reflecting both increased wealth and concern over fire. Public institutions emerged with greater permanence. The establishment of libraries, charitable societies, and cultural associations signaled a maturing civic identity. Anglican churches stood prominently, yet religious diversity widened as dissenting congregations organized more openly. Education for elite families improved through private tutors and connections to Britain. Political life grew more complex as well. The Commons House of Assembly exercised substantial influence over taxation and local legislation, often negotiating with royal governors over fiscal control. This assertiveness did not yet challenge imperial loyalty, but it demonstrated a growing confidence among colonial leaders. By the early 1750s, Charleston embodied a stable yet tightly controlled society. Its prosperity depended on Atlantic commerce and enslaved labor, its politics balanced between crown authority and local interests, and its urban culture reflected increasing refinement within a system built on profound inequality. The 1750s brought renewed imperial conflict and expanding economic ambition. As the 7 Years' War began in 1754, known in North America as the French and Indian War, Charleston's strategic position gained new relevance. Though major fighting occurred farther north and west, the city functioned as a supply and coordination point for British operations in the Southern Theater. Its harbor facilitated troop movements and the shipment of provisions. Militia organization intensified, and coastal defenses were inspected and reinforced. The war confirmed Charleston's importance within the British Atlantic system while also increasing its dependence on imperial military protection. Economically, rice production remained dominant, and indigo exports grew steadily through the 1760s. British subsidies for indigo strengthened planter confidence and tied South Carolina's fortunes even more closely to metropolitan policy. Merchants extended credit networks that reached deep into the interior, binding small planters and traders to Charleston's commercial houses. Enslaved Africans continued to form the majority population in the Lowcountry. Their forced labor sustained plantation output and urban construction, shaping every visible sign of prosperity. The wealth displayed in townhouses, public buildings, and imported goods rested on this coerced foundation. After the war ended in 1763, imperial priorities shifted. Britain sought to stabilize finances and reorganize colonial administration. Measures such as the Sugar Act of 1764 and the Stamp Act of 1765 reached Charleston quickly through its merchant community. Local resistance emerged, coordinated through public meetings and printed broadsides. While loyalty to the crown remained common, opposition to taxation without colonial consent grew firmer. Merchants organized non-importation agreements, temporarily restricting British goods and demonstrating economic leverage. Geography continued to shape political culture. Charleston's status as a port city exposed it directly to imperial regulation and customs enforcement. The arrival of royal officials to oversee trade tightened oversight of shipping and duties. Tensions surfaced between appointed governors and the Commons House of Assembly, particularly over fiscal authority and the funding of defense. By the late 1760s and early 1770s, organized groups such as committees of correspondence began to link Charleston with other colonial centers. Public debate expanded through newspapers and town gatherings. Yet the plantation economy remained intact, and social hierarchies persisted. The city stood at a point of transition. Its prosperity was secure in appearance, but its political alignment was becoming uncertain. The structures that had tied Charleston closely to Britain were beginning to generate friction that would define the coming decade. By the early 1770s, Charleston had become both a prosperous port and a center of organized resistance within the southern colonies. The harbor still carried rice and indigo to Britain and the Caribbean, but political debate increasingly shaped public life. Following the Townshend duties and subsequent disputes over parliamentary authority, merchant leaders and planters strengthened networks of cooperation with other colonial cities. Committees of correspondence operated quietly but efficiently, circulating news and coordinating responses. Newspapers published essays defending colonial rights within the framework of the British Constitution, reflecting a shift from protest to sustained political argument. Economic pressures intensified after 1773. Although South Carolina's economy remained dependent on exports, non-importation agreements resurfaced as a tool of resistance. Merchants balanced commercial risk against political conviction. The plantation system continued to function, sustained by enslaved labor across the Lowcountry rivers. Yet anxiety grew among slaveholding elites, who feared both imperial instability and internal unrest. The memory of earlier rebellions remained present, reinforcing vigilance even as political focus turned toward Britain. Geography again shaped events. Charleston's exposed coastline made it vulnerable to naval power, and imperial authorities understood its strategic value. In 1774, as Parliament passed the Course of Acts in response to unrest in Massachusetts, South Carolina leaders convened a provincial congress in Charleston. Delegates endorsed a continental association, aligning the colony with broader colonial resistance. Royal Governor William Campbell struggled to maintain authority as local institutions assumed greater control over militia organization and public safety. By early 1775, preparations for potential conflict accelerated. Volunteer companies drilled openly. Artillery was secured, and fortifications around the harbor were assessed. Political authority effectively shifted from royal officials to locally elected bodies. Despite these developments, Charleston's leaders remained measured in tone, framing their actions as defensive rather than revolutionary. Trade slowed, credit tightened, and uncertainty affected every layer of society. Between 1720 and 1775, Charleston had evolved from a stable royal port into a colony poised for armed resistance. Its wealth had grown through Atlantic commerce and plantation agriculture. Its social order had hardened around racial hierarchy and enslaved labor. Its political institutions had matured within the British imperial framework before gradually contesting it. By the spring of 1775, the structures that once ensured imperial loyalty now supported organized opposition. The city's geography, economy, and governance had positioned it at the center of events that would soon move beyond debate and into open conflict, closing one era of colonial administration and opening another defined by war.